The Fifth Element was more than just a science fiction film. In Couture, there was anarchy. A movie that made opera seem like the future by dropping a flying taxi into a neon battle zone. But nothing was simple behind the cosmic cacophony and crazy clothes. It took decades to complete the script. There was never a scene where the hero and the villain were together. Additionally, the man who was supposed to play Ruby Road declined to don the wig. 20 strange facts regarding The Fifth Element are listed below. Just as Luc Besson fell in love with someone else, a diva outfit that fit his wife was buried in the chaos. Make a multi-pass request. Logic doesn't slow this ship down. First place. There was a boy living alone in a little French village long before there were flying automobiles and laser warfare. Luc Besson was not exposed to art during his upbringing. He had no Hollywood aspirations or movie parents. He was lonely and creative. He began writing what would become The Fifth Element when he was 16 years old. It wasn't a movie concept back then. It was a universe he could retreat into, a haven to hide. When nothing else around him made sense, he came up with stories like Worlds Within Worlds, Zorgi, Lilu, and the Mondo Shows. After more than 2 decades, that adolescence escape turned into one of the priciest science fiction movies ever produced. And that lonely youngster, penning his way out, was still there beneath all the visual chaos. Second, Luc Besson created a universe rather than merely a film. The Fifth Element's initial draft was not a screenplay. It was a 400-page epic that covered the entire galaxy. It wasn't intended to be a single movie back then. There were several planets, 3 whole stories, dozens of extraterrestrial species with complete languages, histories, and power struggles. It was a trilogy. There were personalities with deep backstories reduced to supporting roles, whole civilizations that never made it past the page, and political subplots involving galactic councils. It was chaotic, wild, and much too long. But brilliant, too. To explain a single prop, Besson devoted years to world building, layer by layer, mapping entire alien faiths, naming animals, and sketching the cities. However, the studios resisted when it came time to shoot. Too strange, too large, too dangerous. So he took the unimaginable action. He condensed everything into a single film, a slimmed-down version that still had plenty of color and mayhem but just a small portion of his original vision. What we witnessed in theaters was only a small portion of a much larger cosmos. The others? Awaiting a return journey, either locked away in journals or circling in Besson's imagination. Third, even with a script in hand, Corbin Dallas's face was nearly different, thus the future was still open. Mel Gibson was the studio's backup plan before Bruce Willis signed on. He had just finished the worldwide hit film Braveheart, which had a strong box office following. Besson, however, paused. Gibson's enthusiasm wasn't appropriate. Too grounded, too melancholy. He desired a person who could manage pandemonium while maintaining a cheerful demeanor. When Willis said yes, everything was different. Beyond being a soldier, Corbin Dallas developed into more. With a cab full of destiny, terrible luck, and a dry wit, he turned into a reluctant hero. It would have been less enjoyable, darker, and cooler with Gibson. But it flew with Bruce. Give me the money, please. Is that a Z140? No, the model is a Charger sock. Yes? Fortunately for me, it isn't loaded. To load it, press the small yellow button. Fourth, there was no audition for Gary Oldman. He didn't pursue the position. The script was hardly read by him. He did it out of courtesy. Oldman's passion project, Nil by Mouth, had been created by Luc Besson a few years prior. Oldman immediately responded in the affirmative when Besson called him up for the fifth ingredient. In private, however, he didn't understand. Later on, he acknowledged that he was unaware of the story's plot. Nevertheless, he arrived wearing a half-helmet made of plastic. Taking inspiration from cartoon villains and Texas oil billionaires, they delivered one of the most weird and memorable sci-fi performances of the 1990s. Fans adored him despite his distaste for the film. Fifth, there was a huge search. More than 8,000 actresses tried out. Some were well known, while others were up and coming. Among them was Elizabeth Berkley, who had just starred in Showgirls. Her reading was audacious. Others entered with loud accents, sci-fi swagger, and extraterrestrial grace. However, none of them felt fresh. Mila Jovovich then entered. Luc Besson claimed that even though she didn't try to dominate the conversation or talk loudly, it struck him right away. She didn't appear to be from any place. Not America, not Earth, nor France. She had the appearance of someone from the future. He recognized her as Lelu the moment she spoke. She was pristine, not because she was polished. Mila embodied the sensation of alienation that they desired without even trying. Therefore, they selected the woman who felt like a mystery out of 8,000 ladies, whether or not she was famous. She wore more than just the orange straps. They became famous because of her. Because fame wasn't necessary for the fifth ingredient. It required presence. Sixth place. She was the universe's key on screen. Her own world was subtly unraveling off-screen. Halfway through The Fifth Element, an alien diva appeared on stage, but she was more than simply a voice. She was the wife of Luc Besson. She was a French actress and independent filmmaker named Maïwenn. Besson cast her as the diva Plavolagina, a mysterious, otherworldly character whose voice actually unlocks the power to save the universe. She was tall, striking, and concealed beneath layers of blue makeup and foam. She stunned the team on screen. That voice, that motion, that hush. But there was more going on behind the scenes. Besson began to fall in love with Mila Jovovich while directing the movie. She was brand new to the business, half my Wednesday's age, and as revolutionary as Lelouch. Besson and Mila's relationship began modestly. Long days on set, late-night script notes, and group language classes. However, it developed too quickly. By the end of filming, Besson was openly with Mila and had discreetly split from Maïwenn. Just a change in orbit in private, no public outrage. While her spouse drifted toward a different type of fifth element, the woman who held the key to save the planet observed from backstage. You can sense it in the finished cut. Both women were radiant. Each one has a unique form of sadness and is unforgettable. 7. Lelouch had a language of her own and spoke not only with her eyes. While creating the script, Luc Besson created the Holy Language, a fully formed alien tongue with more than 400 distinct words. Together, he and Mila developed, honed, rehearsed, and experimented with it before beginning to use it for something else as their connection off-screen grew stronger. Words that no one else on set could read, intimate messages, and love letters. Spoken in. Between scenes and scrawled on paper, it became their secret code. The language endured, but the romance did not. Additionally, every word Mila says in the movie is not meaningless. It's highly personal, practiced, and fluid. Intimate in real life, alien on film. 8th, Lelu was more than just a rescuer. She was a flash of feet and fists that defied gravity, a tornado of raw force. And Mila Jovovich herself was largely responsible for that on-screen aggressiveness. Mila was adamant about embodying Lelou's every explosive movement, even though many actresses rely extensively on stunt doubles. She trained diligently, mastering wire work, fast-paced combat, and fight choreography. She became an authentic action hero as a result of her efforts. Consider the famous combat scene in the corridor. Lelu let loose and, with amazing agility, dispatched several armed guards. It wasn't computer-generated imagery. Furthermore, it wasn't a stunt duplicate wearing a wig in that scene. It was Mila. Her dedication stretched the bounds of what was considered normal as she twisted her body, delivered accurate kicks, and endured exhausting takes. She executed numerous high-energy routines, running the risk of getting bumps and bruises. Because its final weapon needed to bleed, struggle, and fall with true human grit in order for the fifth ingredient to feel real. 9. It wasn't all sci-fi bullshit. It really did work, the crazy all-in-one super weapon Zorg carries. The flamethrower did, anyway. A workable model of the gun with operational flame jets was constructed by the prop department. Additionally, it almost burned the entire set when they tested it. One blast was too high. The ceiling was licked by the flames. Members of the crew rushed. The extinguishers emerged. The message was clear, but no one was harmed. The film did not play it safe. The weapons themselves were deadly. And Besson enjoyed it just that way. 10. Character design wasn't the reason they were slow. They were melting, which is why they were slow. The 80-pound costumes, thick foam, no ventilation, and no cooling systems were worn by the Mondoshawan aliens in the opening scene. Not for dramatic effect, but because the actors inside were about to overheat, they moved slowly down the old halls. A performer had to be taken from the costume in the middle of the action, rehydrated, and stabilized after collapsing due to heat exhaustion. They barely made it through the shoot. One stride at a time, what appeared to be graceful alien dance was actually survival. Hobbit. Ruby Road, number 11, wasn't subtle. Time-stopping screams, a sparkling microphone, and a leopard print. However, the costume was the most absurd aspect, not the performance. Jean-Paul Gaultier intended it to be claustrophobic, noisy, and utterly useless. It had no flexibility, a stiff spine, and weighed 50 pounds. Chris Tucker had trouble sitting, leaning forward, and breathing. He therefore did not sit in a chair in between takes. You would never know that he stood in corners, leaned against walls, and perspired for entire shooting days without any respite. Because sometimes the loudest voice in the cosmos comes from someone who can't even sit down. He's mayhem on film, jumping, shouting, and stealing scenes with every breath. The majority of movies falsify number 12. CGI, camera techniques, and fast cuts are not the fifth element. It wasn't green screen or tiny models that were destroyed when the Divas Performance Hall was destroyed. It was a complete explosion. Carried out in a real building, live. It was the biggest indoor explosion ever caught on camera at the time. One shot, no resets, a measured risk. They had fire marshals waiting, walls set up to collapse, and dozens of cameras. The scene had to be flawless or it would be lost forever. And it was perfect, crazy, and dangerous when it went off. An actual explosion that turned into a visual myth. This one really went up in flames in a film full of crazy ideas. Mongolers won't fight without a commander, so we must find one. Send someone to engage in negotiations. Number 13, huh? Two icons, a hero and a villain, never cross paths, not even by chance. Although they appear in the same story, Bruce Willis and Gary Oldman, Corbin Dallas, and Zorg never interact. Because of choice, not because of scheduling. That's how Luc Besson designed it. Rather than engaging in direct combat, he preferred for the antagonist and hero to battle by cascading effects. Their trajectories circle one another. Get involved. But never come into contact. It's uncommon, dangerous, and strangely powerful. Even without the conventional showdown, the tale manages to keep the tension high. Because sometimes the most formidable foe is the one who doesn't even anticipate your approach. 14. The majority of science fiction is hidden away. Metal corridors, melancholy lighting, and dark ships. That was not what Luc Besson desired. The future didn't have to be bleak, he argued. It might be lively, noisy, and chaotic. He therefore lit the majority of action scenes in bright light rather than with dim interiors. Under a blue sky, taxi chases. Gunfights in white, antiseptic hallways. Golden clouds and orange bursts. Putting every aspect, outfit, and effect in the spotlight was a huge risk. However, that was the main objective. Instead of squinting at the future, he wanted you to see it. He also violated one of the earliest laws of science fiction in doing so. He made it sparkle rather than dark. I inform him that she is departing. My lawyer is the source of the second one. He was leaving when I saw him. You've been fired. The character of Ruby Road belonged to Prince before the leopard print, before the cries, and before Chris Tucker sees the film in a haze of glitter and mayhem. He was always coveted by Luc Besson. The energy, the voice, the unwavering swagger that transcends gender. Prince was curious. He consented to meet. He thought the script was good. Yes, he replied. Then he noticed the outfits. Ruby got a whole wardrobe designed by Jean-Paul Gaultier. Lace, mesh, high-arched heels and plunging necklines, clinging materials, and hues that shouted louder than the character, but Prince somehow refused. Too extreme, even for him, he thought, too feminine. He pulled back. Besson then turned to face Chris Tucker, who had an entirely different vibe. Faster, younger, and more agitated than sultry. Tucker grabbed the component and took off. He transformed Ruby Road into a fast-paced screaming machine by fusing Prince's motions with Michael Jackson's. You can still sense what nearly happened, though, deep down. Tucker was written for royalty, Ruby was not written for him. Prince continues to wield the microphone in a parallel reality of movie. 16. Besson's masterpiece was meant to be this one. The largest budget film ever made in France. A crazy mix of anarchy, fashion, opera, and science fiction. And there was jeering as it made its Cannes debut. It was criticized for being overly loud, foolish, superficial, and nonsense. However, an odd event occurred. Young audiences in particular adored it. Anything didn't matter to them if anything made sense. Ruby Road was cited. They were fixated with Lelou's hair. They repeatedly reenacted the diva's opera moment. Each year, the fandom became louder while the reviews dwindled. Despite its strangeness, The Fifth Element has become a cult classic. As a result, the world accepted what the critics rejected. 17. The majority of films dress up their characters. The entire cosmos was clothed by the Fifth Element. Luc Besson had no desire for conventional sci-fi equipment. He had no desire for recycled space armor or sterile clothing. He desired clothing with a narrative. Thus, he summoned Jean-Paul Gaultier, a legend. The iconic figure of French fashion created more than a few noteworthy creations. He constructed more than 1,000 costumes by himself. Each extraterrestrial race has its own norms, aesthetics, shapes, and textiles. Ancient and armored, the Mondoshawan were encased in pyramids like priests. Metal, grit, and anarchy characterized the snarling mercenaries known as Mangalores. Characters in the background, who appeared in a shot for 2 seconds, were also fully costumed in unique outfits. The drivers of taxis wore reflective clothing. The neoprene corsets worn by flight attendants were skin-tight. The security personnel appeared to be alien nightclub bouncers. It was world-building woven into every thread, not just fashion. Because you only needed to look for the Fifth Element, you didn't require exposition. And the cosmos you saw was outfitted to murder. 18. The initial scene's enormous ships were mythical, not merely science fiction. Egyptian geometry was used in the construction of the Mondoshawan spacecraft because Luc Besson sought to incorporate ancient origins into contemporary ideas. Broad bases, rounded tops, and designs derived from sun worship and temple carvings. The concept? That it's possible that aliens were the pyramids themselves, rather than merely building them. The movie used silent symbolism to connect the past and future while tying spiritual mythology to sci-fi extravaganza. Because even the spaceships had secrets in the Fifth Element. 19. At least in part, it wasn't computer-generated imagery, but it appeared to be. Those enormous cityscapes with neon buildings and flying cars? Dozens of tiny models were first created, including hand-built skyscrapers, tiny lanes for traffic, and layered lighting to provide depth. Similar to the first Star Wars, they used motion control cameras to film them, and then they used computer effects to make them come to life. It was a smooth combination, surreal enough to dream about but real enough to touch. The future was still constructed by hand in a movie that was fixated on texture and mayhem. 20. A French visionary supervised the French production, which was financed by French studios. However, the entire fifth part was shot in English, not for aesthetic reasons, but rather for survival. Luc Besson was aware that the world needs to see his film in order for it to be this strange, vibrant, and costly. He therefore hired British crews, employed American actors, and had the entire production shot at London's Pinewood Studios. It was the most costly movie France had ever made at the time. However, it needed to communicate in the language of blockbusters in order to reach a worldwide audience. And it worked somehow. An added bonus. It was intended to be a catchphrase, not a catchphrase. Lilu repeatedly pronounces it incorrectly. Full of purpose, yet in broken English. And it stuck somehow. Before memes were even a thing, audiences began to quote it, imitate it, and make it into a meme. These days, the term appears in scores of video games, including Cyberpunk 2077 and Borderlands. As a tribute, not as a plot device. A digital homage to one of the most bizarre cult movies in sci-fi. 5 distinct ways to say the same thing, and it remains memorable. Because sometimes a multipass is all that is required. It was too French, too bright, too loud, and too weird. Fans knew what to do with the fifth ingredient, but critics were clueless. They held on to the mayhem, committed the lines to memory, and fell in love with a film that seemed to have been made on a dare but somehow managed to turn out beautifully. Although Luc Besson began writing it when he was 16, it continued to expand. It now survives in colorful fever dreams, fan tattoos, video games, and conventions. Perfection is not the foundation of this sci-fi cult movie, but on the imagination that wouldn't shut up. Leave a remark if this one is still fresh in your mind. Tell us which crazy, iconic movie we should watch next. Because The Fifth Element didn't follow any rules in a world full of them. It simply struck a match and allowed it to burn.